Everywhere we turn today, we hear the word mindfulness. It's on the covers of magazines, in meditation apps, in corporate workshops, and even in schools teaching children how to stay calm. The modern world has fallen in love with this word. In a time when anxiety, stress, and distraction dominate our daily lives, mindfulness seems to promise a return to balance, peace, and mental clarity. Yet, behind this global movement, a quiet question often goes unasked. Is the mindfulness we know today the same mindfulness that the Buddha taught over 2,500 years ago? In the ancient teachings, mindfulness, known as Sati in Pali, was not just about being present or calm. It was a spiritual power, a key factor on the path to awakening. But in the modern era, mindfulness has been repackaged as a tool for relaxation, productivity, and stress management. The word is the same, but its heart has changed. We have taken one of the Buddha's deepest insights and transformed it into a wellness technique for the modern lifestyle. The result is that many people are practicing something called mindfulness without realizing it may have little to do with the original teachings that led countless beings toward liberation. Let us look at how this transformation happened. When the Buddha spoke of Sati, he was speaking to monks and lay practitioners seeking freedom from suffering, not a better night's sleep or higher work efficiency. The goal of mindfulness was nibbana, the extinguishing of craving, ignorance, and self-illusion. But when mindfulness entered the Western world in the late 20th century, it entered a very different culture, one that valued therapy, science, and self-improvement more than liberation. Figures like Jon Kabat-Zinn, who developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, stripped away Buddhist language and ethics to make the practice secular and accessible. It was a wise adaptation meant to help people without religious barriers. Yet, in doing so, something essential was lost: the profound context that gives mindfulness its true meaning. In the modern world, mindfulness is often presented as paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It sounds simple, and it works. People who practice it report lower stress, better focus, and greater emotional stability. But the Buddha's mindfulness was never just about being present. It was about seeing clearly, seeing into the true nature of things. To be mindful, in the Buddhist sense, is to remember the Dhamma in each moment, to see impermanence, suffering, and non-self operating in all experiences. Without this wisdom, mindfulness becomes like a candle without a flame, beautiful to look at, but unable to light the darkness. The world we live in today is filled with noise, distraction, and endless desire. Our attention is constantly stolen by devices, notifications, and the pressure to perform. We are more connected than ever, yet more restless within. It is no surprise that mindfulness has become so popular. People are starving for silence, presence, and peace. But if mindfulness is used only as a way to cope with the chaos, without touching its roots in insight and ethics, it becomes another product of the same restless culture it tries to heal. It soothes the surface, but does not heal the source of suffering. The Buddha's teachings invite us to go deeper. They remind us that mindfulness is not an escape from life's discomfort, but a doorway into truth. To be truly mindful is not to control or suppress what we feel, but to observe it with wisdom, to see how thoughts, emotions, and sensations arise and pass away by causes and conditions. This kind of mindfulness doesn't simply calm the mind, it transforms it. It replaces confusion with clarity, greed with understanding, and fear with compassion. So, as we begin to explore the difference between the Buddha's teachings and modern mindfulness, we must start from this honest recognition. What we call mindfulness today is only a shadow of the original light. The Buddha's mindfulness was never meant to make us feel better. It was meant to make us wake up. The question is, do we truly want to relax, or do we want to be free? To understand what mindfulness truly is, we must return to its roots, to the ancient word sati, spoken by the Buddha in the language of Pali. The word sati does not mean simple attention or awareness. It carries a deeper and more subtle meaning: recollection, remembering, or keeping something in mind. It is the mental faculty that remembers what is right, remembers the Dhamma, and does not let the mind drift away into forgetfulness or ignorance. In other words, sati is not passive observation. It is active remembrance of reality. It recalls truth in the midst of illusion. In the Buddha's time, mindfulness was not taught as a standalone practice. It was one factor among 8 in the Noble Eightfold Path, right mindfulness, or Sati. The path itself was a complete training of life, moral discipline, mental concentration, and wisdom. Within this framework, mindfulness was the bridge between these three, the steady awareness that connects right conduct with right understanding. Without morality, mindfulness lacks purity. Without wisdom, mindfulness lacks direction. The Buddha's teaching always presented these qualities as interdependent, not isolated techniques. When we look into the Pali Canon, we find that the Buddha defined right mindfulness in a very specific way. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, often translated as the Discourse on the Foundations of Mindfulness, he said, "This, monks, is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the right path, for the realization of nibbana, namely, the 4 foundations of mindfulness." This passage reveals something profound. Mindfulness, in the Buddha's words, is not a general awareness of the present moment. It is a precise, structured contemplation of reality through 4 fields: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. To practice sati means to observe these aspects of experience, not with curiosity alone, but with the clear purpose of understanding impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Every breath, every sensation, every thought becomes an opportunity to see the law of nature, that all things arise and pass away, and nothing can be clung to as me or mine. In this light, sati is a wisdom-based awareness. It is not merely noticing what happens. It is knowing what is happening in its true nature. When a feeling arises, the mindful one does not label it as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, but recognizes this is a conditioned phenomenon, dependent on causes. When the body moves, one observes this body is not self, but a process of elements. When a thought appears, one knows this is impermanent. Such knowing cuts through delusion and weakens attachment. This is why the Buddha said mindfulness leads to purification. It burns away ignorance through direct insight. The word sati also connects to smriti in Sanskrit, which shares the same root meaning: to remember. This remembering is not intellectual memory, but the constant recollection of the Dhamma in every moment of living. It keeps the mind from falling into forgetfulness, the state in which craving and aversion easily arise. The unmindful mind forgets reality and gets lost in stories, emotions, and identities. The mindful mind, on the other hand, remembers the truth again and again, keeping awareness aligned with wisdom. In the daily life of the ancient monks, sati was practiced in every posture: walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. It was not confined to formal meditation. A monk eating alms food was mindful of each bite, aware of the body's movement, the arising of taste, the feelings that followed, and the thoughts that appeared. The aim was not to enjoy the moment more deeply, but to see through the illusion of permanence. By remembering the Dhamma in each act, the practitioner lived in constant awareness of the changing flow of life. It is also important to see that mindfulness in the Buddha's teaching always had an ethical and liberating context. It was part of a spiritual discipline designed to uproot greed, hatred, and delusion. Without this moral compass, mindfulness would not lead to freedom, but might simply reinforce self-centered awareness. That is why the Buddha placed right mindfulness after right effort and before right concentration. It arises when the mind is already purified by wholesome effort, and it naturally supports deep meditative stability. Thus, when we speak of mindfulness as the Buddha taught it, we are speaking of something sacred and profound. It is not a technique to improve our lifestyle, but a method to end the cycle of suffering. Sati is the guardian of the mind, the ever-watchful awareness that remembers truth and prevents delusion from taking over. It keeps the light of wisdom alive moment by moment. The Buddha's mindfulness cannot be separated from the path to liberation. To practice it is to walk in the footsteps of countless awakened beings who looked directly into the nature of mind and saw beyond the illusion of I and mine. This is the original mindfulness, the one that purifies, awakens, and frees. When we understand this, we begin to see how far modern interpretations have drifted from the source, and why remembering the original meaning of Sati is the first step toward rediscovering the path that leads not just to calm, but to enlightenment itself. In today's world, mindfulness has become a universal word, so common that it has lost its roots. You can find it in hospitals, corporations, therapy sessions, fitness classes, and smartphone apps. It is taught to soldiers, students, athletes, and business executives. Everywhere, people are told to be mindful, to live in the present moment, to breathe and let go. It sounds wise, and it often works. People who practice mindfulness in this modern form usually report that they sleep better, worry less, and handle emotions more calmly. There is no denying that this new wave of mindfulness has helped millions of people find balance in the chaos of contemporary life. Yet, beneath this success lies a subtle question. What exactly is this modern mindfulness teaching us? And how close is it to what the Buddha intended? When he spoke of Sati, modern mindfulness, as it is most widely known today, was largely shaped by the work of John Kabat-Zinn in the late 20th century. His program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, brought meditation into the secular world by removing religious symbols and traditional Buddhist language. He defined mindfulness as awareness that arises through paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. This definition became the foundation for a global movement. It resonated with doctors, psychologists, and educators because it was practical, inclusive, and scientifically measurable. It didn't ask people to believe in karma or rebirth. It simply invited them to observe their breath, sensations, and thoughts with acceptance. Through MBSR and similar approaches, mindfulness began to be treated not as a path to enlightenment, but as a form of mental hygiene, like brushing your teeth for the mind. The purpose was to manage stress, anxiety, and emotional pain in a world that constantly demands speed and performance. In workplaces, mindfulness was introduced to improve focus, productivity, and resilience. In therapy, it was used to help patients deal with depression, addiction, and trauma. In schools, children were taught to use mindfulness to regulate emotions and improve attention. Everywhere, it was presented as a gentle medicine for the restless modern mind. And indeed, there is beauty in that. Modern mindfulness has opened the door for countless people who might never have approached Buddhist meditation otherwise. It offers a secular language for introspection and emotional healing. It teaches people to pause, breathe, and notice their thoughts instead of being carried away by them. In a time when human attention has become one of the most exploited commodities, even a small moment of awareness is precious. From that perspective, the mindfulness movement is a gift to humanity. Yet, at the same time, there is a quiet danger hidden within its popularity. By stripping mindfulness of its original ethical and philosophical foundation, modern culture has turned it into a tool of adaptation rather than liberation. It helps us cope with stress, but not question its cause. It soothes the surface of suffering without investigating the roots beneath it. When mindfulness is taught only as being in the present moment, it becomes a way of feeling comfortable in the very conditions that generate our discontent, consumerism, competition, and constant desire. We learn to observe our pain without seeing the craving that causes it. We learn to calm the mind without understanding the nature of the mind itself. In this modern form, mindfulness becomes neutral, almost mechanical. It asks for awareness, but not for wisdom. It values calmness, but not understanding. It observes emotions, but does not inquire into their impermanent, empty nature. This approach may bring temporary relief, but it cannot bring freedom from suffering because it does not challenge the illusion of self that keeps suffering alive. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness so that people could function better in an unjust or restless world. He taught it so they could see through the world's illusions altogether. There is another difference that is easy to overlook. In the Buddhist teaching, mindfulness was always connected with intention and moral responsibility. It was supported by right effort, the effort to abandon unwholesome states and cultivate wholesome ones. But modern mindfulness often presents itself as non-judgmental and value-free. It encourages observing thoughts and emotions without labeling them as good or bad. While this attitude can be helpful in psychological healing, it can also blur the distinction between wholesome and unwholesome states of mind. The Buddha's mindfulness was never morally neutral. It was guided by wisdom and compassion. A mind that is aware but indifferent to ethics is not right mindfulness. It is simply awareness without direction. Moreover, modern mindfulness tends to emphasize comfort over confrontation. Many programs teach mindfulness as a relaxation method, something to make us feel peaceful and centered. But the Buddha's mindfulness was not meant to make life more comfortable. It was meant to reveal the truth of suffering. True mindfulness can be unsettling because it exposes the constant change and emptiness at the heart of experience. It shows us that there is no solid self to protect, no permanent happiness to hold. Modern mindfulness, by avoiding these uncomfortable truths, can sometimes become a form of spiritual avoidance, a way to escape pain without understanding it. This does not mean that modern mindfulness is wrong or useless. It simply means that it serves a different purpose. It belongs to the world of healing, therapy, and self-care, while the Buddha's mindfulness belongs to the world of awakening. One helps us live better, the other helps us see beyond living and dying altogether. The modern approach offers calm. The ancient one offers clarity. The modern approach reduces stress. The ancient one dissolves ignorance. Both have value, but they are not the same. In the end, mindfulness, as taught today, reflects the culture that adopted it, a culture that seeks quick solutions, measurable results, and personal improvement. It fits perfectly into the rhythm of modern life because it promises peace, without requiring transformation. It allows people to remain who they are, only calmer. But the Buddha's mindfulness was revolutionary. It asked people to question who they think they are. It invited them to look directly into impermanence, to see through attachment, and to awaken to a freedom that cannot be marketed or measured. Thus, when we speak of modern mindfulness, we must see it as both a doorway and a distraction. It opens the mind to awareness but risks closing the heart to wisdom. It helps us cope but may stop us from truly awakening. To rediscover the original power of mindfulness, we must go beyond the surface of present moment awareness and return to its essence, the remembrance of truth that leads not to calmness alone, but to liberation. At the heart of all spiritual confusion lies one simple misunderstanding. We mistake comfort for freedom. In the modern world, mindfulness is often promoted as a way to relax, to feel better, to reduce anxiety, to find calm in the storm of life. But in the Buddha's teaching, mindfulness was never about feeling better. It was about seeing better. It was not a therapy for the mind. It was a mirror that reflected the truth of existence. When we compare modern mindfulness and the Buddha's mindfulness, the most striking difference lies in their purpose. One seeks temporary relief. The other seeks ultimate release. One soothes the pain, the other uproots its cause. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness so that we could manage stress or handle our emotions more skillfully. He taught it so that we could see the nature of stress itself, its origin, its cessation, and the path leading out of it. When he spoke of mindfulness, he was not teaching people how to cope with life, but how to understand life at its deepest level, to realize that all phenomena, whether pleasant or painful, are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. Modern mindfulness tells us to accept the present moment as it is. The Buddha's mindfulness goes further. It asks us to look directly into that moment and see its emptiness, to recognize that even the present moment cannot be held, for it is already changing. When mindfulness is used merely to relax, it becomes a soft pillow for the mind, comfortable, but not transformative. It calms the waves on the surface, but the deep currents of craving and ignorance remain untouched. The mind learns to rest temporarily, but not to wake up. True mindfulness, in contrast, is like a flame that burns away illusion. It illuminates the hidden patterns of attachment that bind us to suffering. It is active, sharp, and fearless. It doesn't simply watch, it penetrates. It doesn't merely notice sensations. It sees their nature. It doesn't stop at peace. It moves toward wisdom. Imagine two people sitting in meditation. The first one closes her eyes, breathes slowly, and focuses on her breath to relax. After a stressful day, She feels calmer, her thoughts settle, and her body loosens. This is modern mindfulness. It soothes the nervous system, offers peace, and helps her function better in daily life. The second person also focuses on the breath, but with a different intention. He observes the rising and falling of the abdomen, the changing sensation of air passing through the nose, and the impermanence of each breath. He sees that each inhalation is born, lives briefly, and dies away. Through this observation, he realizes that the body, too, is a process, not a self. His calm is not the goal, it is the byproduct of insight. This is the Buddha's mindfulness. It doesn't stop at relaxation, it leads to awakening. In modern mindfulness, the question often asked is, how can I feel better? In the Buddha's mindfulness, the question is, what is this feeling, and who is the one that feels? The first seeks comfort, the second seeks truth. The first accepts suffering as part of life and learns to live with it. The second sees suffering as a teacher, a signal pointing toward delusion, and works to transcend it. The difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Modern mindfulness helps us survive within the dream of the world. Buddhist mindfulness helps us wake up from it. Liberation requires courage, the courage to face what we have always avoided. True mindfulness does not always feel peaceful. Sometimes it reveals the restlessness, fear, and emptiness we try so hard to hide. It shows us that even our moments of joy are impermanent, that every pleasure carries within it the seed of loss. It asks us to let go of not only what hurts, but also what pleases. Such practice can feel uncomfortable at first, because the ego does not want to dissolve, it wants to feel good. But the Buddha's path is not about making the ego comfortable. It is about seeing that the ego itself is a mirage. When that illusion fades, the peace that remains is not the peace of comfort, but the peace of truth. In the world of consumer spirituality, this distinction has become blurred. The promise of mindfulness is often sold as inner peace on demand, a gentle escape from the noise of modern life. Apps promise serenity in 10 minutes a day. Retreats advertise stress-free weekends. Companies use mindfulness to keep employees focused and efficient. In this way, mindfulness becomes another product to consume, a spiritual bandage over a restless culture. But the Buddha never promised comfort to his disciples. He promised awakening, which is something entirely different. Awakening may bring peace, but it is not the peace of escape. It is the peace that arises when there is nothing left to escape from. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, his insight was not that everything is fine just as it is, but that everything is impermanent, conditioned, and empty of a self. This insight destroyed ignorance at its root. He saw that suffering arises because the mind clings to what changes, and that liberation comes when the mind stops clinging altogether. This is the essence of mindfulness in the Buddhist sense, not to rest in the moment, but to see through the moment, to watch the arising and passing away of every experience until the very sense of I am dissolves into the flow of causes and conditions. This is why the Buddha described mindfulness as the direct path to purification. It purifies the mind from defilements, not by suppressing them, but by seeing them clearly. When greed arises, the mindful one knows, this is greed. When anger arises, he knows, this is anger. When ignorance arises, he sees it for what it is, blindness. In that seeing, the power of these defilements weakens. Awareness itself becomes the fire that burns away impurity. In contrast, modern mindfulness often stops at recognition. I notice my anger, but does not go further into investigation. What gives rise to this anger? Is it permanent? Is it self? Without this deeper inquiry, mindfulness remains surface-level observation. The modern world teaches us to control stress. The Buddha taught us to end suffering. The first is psychological, the second is existential. One adjusts the mind within samsara, the other transcends samsara itself. To practice true mindfulness is not to manage the waves of life, but to understand the ocean's nature. When one sees clearly that there is no I swimming in the sea only. Today, we can see two paths growing side by side. One path is wide, comfortable, and filled with people seeking rest, the path of relaxation. The other is narrow, steep, and walked by those seeking truth, the path of liberation. Both may begin with awareness of the breath, but only one leads beyond the breath, beyond the self, beyond becoming. That is the path the Buddha walked. That is the mindfulness he taught, not a technique to ease the mind, but a doorway to the end of all becoming. If we wish to rediscover the true essence of mindfulness, we must return to its ancient root, the word Sati itself. In the Pali Canon, Sati does not simply mean awareness of the present moment. It means remembering, but not the kind of remembering that recalls past events. It is a remembering that keeps the mind from wandering into delusion. It is the mental quality that holds the Dhamma, the truth, in constant view, so that wisdom can recognize the impermanent and selfless nature of all things. To have Sati is to keep one's mind awake, remembering what is real, remembering the path, remembering to see clearly. In this way, Sati is not a passive state of mind. It is active, vigilant, and purposeful. The one who practices true mindfulness is not simply observing sensations as they arise. They are remembering the right way to see them. Every moment of awareness becomes an opportunity to see the truth of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Without this remembrance, awareness easily becomes dull or self-centered. We may watch our thoughts, but secretly identify with them. We may observe our emotions, but still cling to them. The purpose of Sati is to prevent exactly this, to remind us again and again that nothing we experience is truly I or mine. This remembrance is like a light in a dark room. Without it, the mind quickly forgets its direction. It becomes lost in memories, plans, judgments, and daydreams. But when Sati is present, the mind remains grounded, aware not just of what is happening, but of the nature of what is happening. The Buddha compared this to a gatekeeper who stands watch at the city gate, carefully observing who comes and who goes. The gatekeeper does not stop anyone by force. He simply knows. In the same way, Sati does not control or suppress the mind. It observes with wisdom. It sees the arising and passing away of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, and in that seeing, attachment loses its grip. The modern idea of mindfulness often overlooks this remembering aspect. It focuses on being aware of what is, but forgets to ask why awareness is cultivated in the first place. Awareness without direction is like a lamp left burning in daylight. It gives light, but to no purpose. The Buddha's mindfulness always points toward awakening. Each breath, each step, each thought is an opportunity to remember the Dhamma, to wake up from forgetfulness. When one truly practices Sati, awareness is not just present, it is wise. It remembers impermanence in the midst of pleasure, and it remembers non-self in the midst of pain. It remembers that everything is conditioned, and nothing can be held. This remembrance is what transforms mindfulness into a path of liberation. Without it, mindfulness can even strengthen the illusion of self. Many people who practice modern mindfulness say, "I am being mindful," without realizing that this very phrase, "I am," is the subtle root of delusion. True Sati sees through this. It remembers that the observer itself is also observed. Even mindfulness, when examined closely, is not mine. It arises and passes away like everything else. The Buddha's teaching was radical in this way. Nothing, not even consciousness, is permanent or owned by a self. To remember this truth moment by moment, that is Sati. When Sati matures, it gives rise to another mental factor called sampajañña, or clear comprehension. This is the wisdom that knows what is happening, why it is happening, and how it should be understood. Together, Sati and sampajañña form the foundation of all spiritual progress. Sati remembers the Dhamma, sampajañña understands it. One keeps the torch lit, the other sees by its light. Without Sati, wisdom cannot be sustained. Without sampajañña, mindfulness cannot deepen. This is why the Buddha repeatedly urged his disciples to cultivate both, not just to pay attention, but to know and understand. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the Buddha described the four foundations of mindfulness, contemplation of the body, feelings, mind, and dhammas. But he never told his disciples to simply observe these things for relaxation. Each contemplation is meant to reveal a truth. When one observes the body, one sees that it is composed of elements, earth, water, fire, and air, and therefore has no self. When one observes feelings, one sees that pleasure and pain are impermanent, constantly changing. When one observes the mind, one sees that it rises and falls with conditions. And when one observes dhammas, mental phenomena, one sees the laws that govern existence itself. This is not passive watching, it is awakening through observation. In modern times, the word mindfulness has become divorced from its roots, floating freely in psychology, therapy, and self-help. But the ancient Sati was always bound to ethics and wisdom. It cannot exist in isolation. True mindfulness is supported by sila and leads to panna. Without morality, mindfulness lacks purity. Without wisdom, it lacks direction. The Buddha's mindfulness is like a compass on the path. It remembers which way leads to freedom and keeps the traveler from wandering astray. In contrast, mindfulness stripped of morality and wisdom becomes merely a technique. Useful, perhaps, but limited to the realm of worldly well-being. The word sati also carries the sense of continuity, the ability to sustain awareness from moment to moment without forgetting. It is not about forcing the mind to stay in one place, but about remembering to return whenever it drifts. Each time we bring the mind back to awareness, we strengthen this quality. Over time, it becomes effortless. The mind naturally remembers to be awake, like a flame that keeps itself alive even in the wind. This is why the Buddha called mindfulness the guardian of the mind. It protects us from falling into heedlessness, from losing ourselves in craving, aversion, or ignorance. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of sati is that it is gentle. It does not scold or force. When the mind forgets, sati simply remembers again. When the mind wanders, sati quietly brings it home. There is no judgment, no battle, no demand to be perfect. The act of remembering itself is awakening. Even one moment of clear awareness is a moment of freedom. And the more often we remember, the more the veil of delusion thins. To practice sati, then, is to live in remembrance, not of the past, but of truth. It is to keep the Dhamma close to the heart, to let it guide every perception, every decision, every breath. It is to remember that all things arise and pass away, and that clinging to any of them brings suffering. It is to remember that nothing is mine, not even the mind. That remembers. And it is to remember again and again that awakening is not somewhere far away. It is right here, in this very act of remembering. When mindfulness returns to its original meaning, sati as remembering to awaken, it regains its full power. It is no longer a tool for relaxation, but a force for liberation. It becomes the living flame of awareness that burns through ignorance and lights the way to freedom. This is the mindfulness the Buddha taught, not an escape from the world, but a remembrance of what the world truly is. It is the remembering that ends forgetting, the awareness that ends becoming, the clarity that ends confusion. And when that remembrance becomes unbroken, the one who remembers disappears, and only truth remains. To understand mindfulness as the Buddha truly taught it, one must see that it was never meant to be practiced for comfort, for success, or even for mental health alone. It was the direct doorway to awakening, the bridge between ignorance and wisdom, between bondage and freedom. In the Buddha's path, mindfulness is not one practice among many. It is the very thread that connects all others. Without mindfulness, morality becomes mechanical and meditation becomes blind. Without mindfulness, wisdom cannot arise, for the mind would drift endlessly between distraction and delusion. Thus, the Buddha called mindfulness the path to the deathless, meaning the state beyond the cycle of birth and death, the realization of nibbana itself. When one practices mindfulness in the deepest sense, one is not merely aware of what happens, but also aware of how it happens. This is the difference between ordinary awareness and liberating insight. Ordinary awareness notices the body, the breath, the thoughts. Liberating mindfulness goes further. It sees that each of these phenomena arises due to causes and conditions, and that they vanish when those causes cease. It recognizes the continuous stream of arising and passing, the impermanence at the heart of everything. From that recognition comes a profound understanding. Nothing lasts, nothing can be clung to, and nothing can truly satisfy. This insight is not a belief, but a direct seeing, born from mindfulness that penetrates reality as it is. The Buddha described this process in simple yet powerful terms. When mindfulness is established, one observes the arising of the body, its movement, its sensations, its aging, and its decay. One sees that even the breath, so constant and dependable, is impermanent, beginning, flowing, ending, disappearing. In the same way, one observes feelings. Pleasant feelings come and fade. Painful ones arise and pass. Neutral feelings change unnoticed. The mindful mind sees that all are transient, and that clinging to any of them brings suffering. It observes thoughts as they appear, like clouds crossing the sky, sometimes bright, sometimes dark, but never the sky itself. Gradually, the illusion that there is a thinker behind the thoughts begins to weaken. One begins to see thoughts not as mine, but as conditioned patterns of consciousness, arising due to contact, memory, and habit. This is the beginning of wisdom, seeing that experience unfolds by natural law, not by a permanent self. As mindfulness deepens, it becomes continuous and balanced. The practitioner no longer struggles to hold attention. Instead, attention holds itself. The mind becomes like a clear mirror, reflecting everything without distortion, yet clinging to nothing. In this state, insight begins to mature into direct understanding. One sees not only impermanence, but also the inherent unsatisfactoriness of all conditioned phenomena. Even the most joyful experiences are fragile, fleeting, and dependent on countless unseen factors. This realization is not meant to make one despair. It frees one from false expectations. When one no longer demands permanence from the impermanent, peace naturally arises. Then, through mindfulness, the final and most subtle truth reveals itself. Anatta, the absence of an unchanging self. The Buddha's mindfulness training leads the practitioner step by step to see that there is no I who owns or controls experience. The body moves, but there is no mover behind it. The mind thinks, but there is no thinker. Feelings arise, but there is no one who feels them. This does not mean that life ceases to exist. Rather, the illusion of ownership dissolves. One sees life as a flowing process, dynamic, interdependent, selfless. The burden of I and mine, carried for countless lifetimes, quietly drops away. What remains is pure knowing, free from grasping, radiant, and unbound. At this point, mindfulness is no longer something one does. It becomes the natural state of an awakened mind. Every perception is clear, every movement is understood, and every thought is seen as simply another wave in the ocean of conditions. Nothing is rejected, nothing is held. The world still appears, but its weight is gone. Suffering no longer finds a foothold, for the one who suffered has vanished. This is why the Buddha said that mindfulness leads to the direct knowledge and to nibbana. It is not a tool to improve the self, but a light that reveals there was never a separate self to improve. To walk this path, however, requires patience and sincerity. Mindfulness matures not through force, but through constant remembering and gentle persistence. Each moment of awareness plants a seed. Each time the mind remembers to observe instead of react, wisdom grows a little stronger. The Buddha compared it to slowly polishing a mirror. At first, it is clouded and unclear. With steady practice, it becomes bright enough to reflect the truth. Many people today seek quick results, instant calm, instant insight. But true mindfulness cannot be rushed. It unfolds as the mind becomes more honest with itself, as it learns to face pain without resistance and joy without attachment. Ethical living also plays a crucial role. Mindfulness thrives in a mind that is unburdened by guilt, regret, or conflict. When one lives with honesty, kindness, and restraint, mindfulness flows naturally, unhindered by remorse. This is why Sila is said to be the foundation of mindfulness, and mindfulness the foundation of wisdom. Without morality, the mind cannot rest. Without rest, mindfulness cannot deepen. Without mindfulness, wisdom cannot arise. Thus, all parts of the path are interwoven like strands of a single thread, each supporting and strengthening the others. When mindfulness is established, it transforms not only meditation but everyday life. Eating becomes a meditation, walking becomes a meditation, speaking and listening become acts of awareness. The practitioner begins to see that the path is not limited to the cushion or the monastery. It is lived moment to moment, breath by breath. To be mindful while speaking is to remember kindness. To be mindful while listening is to remember patience. To be mindful while facing anger is to remember compassion. In this way, mindfulness dissolves the boundaries between meditation and life itself. Every ordinary moment becomes sacred because every moment is seen clearly. In the end, mindfulness as the Buddha taught it is not about becoming calm, though calmness may arise. It is not about being present for the sake of pleasure, though peace may come. It is about seeing reality as it truly is, without distortion, without self, without clinging. That vision alone liberates the heart. When mindfulness reaches its perfection, it merges with wisdom. And together they cut through ignorance like a sharp blade slicing through illusion. The Buddha described this union as the direct path, the one way that purifies beings in sorrow, overcomes suffering, and leads to peace. To practice mindfulness, therefore, is to practice freedom. Each moment of remembering is a step away from ignorance, a step toward awakening. It is not something distant or mystical. It begins here, with this breath, this awareness, this remembering. The one who walks the path of mindfulness walks the path of all Buddhas. For mindfulness is the heart of the Dhamma, the pulse of enlightenment itself. And when mindfulness becomes unbroken, when the mind no longer forgets its true nature, the path ends, not in annihilation, but in the serene stillness of complete understanding. That stillness is what the Buddha called nibbana, the end of becoming, the silence after the storm, the freedom that no word can describe, but every moment of true mindfulness quietly reveals. The true measure of mindfulness is not found in how long one can sit with closed eyes, nor in how many hours are spent on a meditation cushion. It is found in how deeply one lives with awareness, compassion, and clarity in the middle of ordinary life. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness to create monks who escape the world, but awakened beings who live in it without being bound by it. He spoke of farmers, merchants, mothers, and kings who practiced mindfulness as they worked, ate, spoke, and walked. The path was never meant to belong only to monasteries. It was meant to flow through every breath of daily existence. To live mindfully is to make every act, however small, an expression of awakening. In the early morning, when one opens the eyes to see the first light of day, mindfulness can begin right there. Before thoughts of plans and duties arise, one can pause for a single breath and remember, I am awake. Life is here, unfolding again. That small moment of remembrance already changes the direction of the day. Instead of being pulled immediately into automatic habits, the mind becomes anchored in awareness. When washing the face, brushing the teeth, or putting on clothes, one does not rush mindlessly. One feels the sensations of movement, the texture of the fabric, the coolness of water, the rhythm of breathing. These are not trivial acts. They are the living classroom where mindfulness is learned and strengthened. In work, mindfulness transforms effort into practice. Whether typing at a desk, building a wall, teaching a student, or cooking a meal, awareness can flow through every motion. The key is not what one does, but how one does it. When the mind is scattered, work becomes mechanical and draining. But when mindfulness is present, even the simplest task becomes meaningful. Each movement, each decision, each interaction becomes an opportunity to remember the Dhamma, to act with honesty, patience, and care. The Buddha once said that even sweeping the floor can be a holy act if done with awareness. Mindfulness makes the ordinary sacred because it turns every action into a mirror reflecting the mind itself. In communication, mindfulness is perhaps even more essential. Words can heal or harm, unite or divide. When one speaks without mindfulness, words are driven by craving, fear, or pride. But when one pauses before speaking, remembering to be aware, a gap opens between impulse and action. In that small space, wisdom can choose a response instead of reacting blindly. The Buddha called this right speech, speaking truthfully, kindly, and at the right time. Mindfulness makes this possible. It listens before it speaks. It feels before it acts. It allows compassion to arise naturally, because one is aware of the other's pain as well as one's own. When one listens with mindfulness, one hears not just the words but the heart behind them. This is how awareness becomes love in action. Even in moments of conflict or difficulty, mindfulness protects the mind from falling into hatred or despair. Life inevitably brings challenges, loss, misunderstanding, frustration, failure. When mindfulness is absent, these experiences create anger, sorrow, and self-pity. But when mindfulness is alive, suffering becomes the ground of insight. Instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" one begins to ask, "What can I learn from this?" Each painful emotion becomes an invitation to observe impermanence, to see how feelings arise and pass. The moment one remembers to be aware, one is no longer trapped by the emotion. The mind becomes a witness instead of a prisoner. That is freedom, even in the midst of difficulty. Mindfulness also transforms our relationship with the body. Modern life often treats the body as either a tool to control or an image to perfect. But through mindfulness, the body becomes a field of wisdom. Each breath, each sensation, each ache or pleasure reveals the truth of impermanence. When one walks, one knows one is walking. When one eats, one knows one is eating. This simple knowing creates a deep intimacy with life. Food is no longer just a taste. It becomes the miracle of earth, rain, and sunlight entering the body. Walking is no longer just a means of getting somewhere. It becomes a dance of balance and gravity. In this way, mindfulness turns the body into a living temple, a reminder that existence itself is sacred when seen with clear eyes. In relationships, mindfulness reveals the interconnectedness that the Buddha called paticca, dependent origination. When one is mindful, one sees that others are not separate from oneself. The anger of another arises due to causes, just as one's own anger does. The joy of another becomes one's joy. The pain of another becomes one's concern. This understanding naturally gives rise to compassion. Mindfulness softens the boundaries of me and you, and what remains is the simple truth that all beings seek happiness and wish to avoid suffering. To live mindfully is to live gently, knowing that every thought, word, and action creates ripples in the great web of life. Even in solitude, mindfulness keeps the mind company. When the world grows silent and one sits alone, one can see how restless the mind truly is, always chasing after something, never satisfied. Yet this restlessness itself becomes the object of mindfulness. By watching it without judgment, one sees how craving keeps the wheel of becoming turning. And in that seeing, the craving loses its power. Solitude, when filled with mindfulness, becomes serenity, not loneliness. It becomes a space where the heart remembers its true home, the stillness beneath all movement, the peace beneath all noise. The beauty of mindfulness is that it does not depend on external conditions. It can be practiced in a monastery or a marketplace, in silence or in chaos, in health or in sickness. It asks for no special setting, only sincerity. Wherever one remembers, mindfulness is there. Even one mindful breath, taken in the middle of a busy street or an argument, can bring clarity and calm. Each moment of remembering strengthens the habit of awakening. Slowly, the gaps between moments of awareness grow shorter until mindfulness becomes continuous, flowing like a stream that never stops. In truth, to live mindfully is to live as though one were constantly waking up from a dream. The world remains the same faces, the same duties, the same joys and sorrows, but one's perception changes completely. One no longer moves through life as a half-conscious being pulled by desires and fears. One lives as a witness, aware of the unfolding play of conditions. Actions continue, but they arise from wisdom, not compulsion. Life continues, but it is lived from freedom, not attachment. This is what the Buddha meant by living awake among the sleeping. At the end of the day, when one sits quietly, before sleep, mindfulness returns once more. The events of the day can be remembered, not to judge or regret, but to see clearly how thoughts arose, how words were spoken, how emotions passed. One recognizes moments of heedlessness and moments of clarity, without pride or shame. This gentle reflection nourishes understanding. Then, as the body rests, one lets go of everything, aware even of the breath that fades into sleep. In that last conscious moment, one is already practicing the art of letting go, the same art that leads to the final letting go of nibbana. Thus, mindfulness is not a practice we visit for an hour each day. It is a way of being. It is the art of remembering, moment by moment, to live with awareness, kindness, and wisdom. It transforms daily life into a path of awakening, turning the mundane into the sacred, the fleeting into the timeless. When mindfulness becomes continuous, the division between practice and life disappears. Every step, every breath, every smile becomes an expression of freedom. The Buddha's path then ceases to be a distant ideal. It becomes the very life one is living right now, illuminated by the gentle, unbroken light of awareness.